I'm sure you've all seen gourds and you've seen pine needles, but in today's episode of Handmade, we're going to see an artisan put them together to make some really cool art. Welcome to Handmade, a series about artisans and craftsmen who use their creativity and skills to make unique works of art. Not only will you see these artisans at work, but you'll hear about their creative process and how they acquired the skills to make their unique pieces of art. So come on, let's go visit the studio of today's featured artisan. Kathy Janke is a professional artist with her own gallery and studio in the Smoky Mountains of East Tennessee. Like many creative people, she works in different mediums, but her unique talent of combining pine needles and gourds has made her an award-winning artist.
As I'm weaving, the basket often begins to take on a life of its own, taking me down a path I didn't see or travel before. To me, each pine needle basket, every single one has been different, and you're not following a pattern.
I'm really looking forward to how you combine two different mediums, the pine straw and the gourds, to make the baskets. So why don't we get right into it, and let's go into your workshop and we'll see the preparation of how the materials are made.
That'd be great. This form of basketry uses southern longleaf pine needles and gourds. The needles come from southern Louisiana, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, the Carolinas. I get most of mine from mid-range Alabama. If they are picked up off the ground, you get them dried like this, brown. If they're picked green and they're dried in a garage, which is wonderful, they're a light green. I put about 2 inches of water in the turkey roaster. I put in a quart of glycerin. If I want to dye them, 2 bottles of RIT dye, kind of swish that around. Then I weigh out and put in 2 pounds of the pine needles. A couple of times while it's happening, I take the Pyrex off, swish it around a little bit to make sure that they're getting total coverage. Take them over to the sink and run the water until it runs clear. It can take sometimes an hour. This morning I just kept filling up the tub, one fill after another, and swishing them around. You're never going to get it totally clear, but it's important you get the majority of it out, because if you're using a light colored thread, you will turn around and pick up that color transfer on the thread as you're pulling it through. From this stage, we'll take them over and lay them out on the drying rack. You can buy gourds straight out of a field. If you do, they're going to look pretty grody like this. The only way to clean them is to cover them with Dawn dishwashing detergent, throw them in a black garbage bag, let them bake for a day, and then literally sometimes wail away on them with a steel chore ball. Ideally, you can buy them when they've already been cleaned. And this is what I endeavor to do. It saves just a heck of a lot of time. So when I start with the gourd, you can use a pencil. I like using this white pencil. You're going to draw on it. So if I want like a dip type thing, I'm going around like that and then drawing my dips, whatever. When I get ready to cut it open, you can put a drill hole in here. It's hard for me to get my jigsaw blade in there. So I take my wood burning set and wood burn just a little slit in. Then I take my jigsaw, put it in, and I work my way around. It just so happened when I cut this gourd open, it was relatively clean. This is what seeds look like, but they can be where it's just totally full of crud. And you start with this tool and you're scraping it all out. There's a lot of different tools that you can use. This comes in a fine grit, a heavy grit, and a shorter stem. So you would put this on your drill, hold your gourd, and ream it out with this. This is another really nice tool that you can put on your drill and get in there and sand. For the final sand, this is drywall sanding, and this will get a really fine feel on the inside. This was one that I pulled out this morning, and originally when I looked at this piece, I thought these are called dipper gourds, and I have some that are a lot smaller. Probably have about 2 dozen. I was going to mount maybe 3 across here, and I decided that this piece was just so beautiful that I really, instead of doing a horizontal piece with 3, I wanted to do an upright and mount this either like that or like this. I'm not sure yet. I got to take it in, get it flat, manipulate it, and whatever. And then this gourd, I would cut open, depending upon how it's mounted, I would cut open an opening like that. But the weaving doesn't necessarily just stay like this. In the gallery, you can see where I've taken one and I've gone around either the driftwood or the gourd itself. I drill the holes first before I spray paint the inside with flat black. I use flat black because it shows the imperfections less in the inside of the gourd. The question that you want to ask yourself is, are you weaving in, or is it something where you're weaving out? If you're weaving out, your stitches are going to spread, and you want to get your holes as close together as you can. A shape this size, traditionally, I would kind of be weaving in, and my holes are pretty much about 1/2 inch apart. At that point, it's ready for me to take inside. All of those steps between cutting them open, sanding the rim, drilling the holes, and spraying or using those 3 products can take about 4 days, 5 days sometimes, with drying time in between. I usually will do anywhere from 6 gourds up to 30 at a time if I'm teaching a class.
How do you continue to grow as an artist?
Every day that I wake up, I have stuff in my head, and I'll never live long enough to be able to produce everything that I want to make.
Now that you've finished showing us about the preparing of the materials, why don't you tell us a little bit about actually making the baskets?
Well, the pine needles that we just finished with, you should be able to bend them like this when you're done. And that's my goal in terms of weaving. The gourd process, this is what it looks like when we finish in the garage, when everything's been sprayed on it. For me, the next step is the most fun, and that's deciding how I put it together. I have 3 drawers of file cabinets that are full of beads. Sometimes I'll go in and start looking through my beads and think, oh, I really want to use these beads this time. But really, the next step is deciding, what do I do to the outside of this gourd? Am I going to leave it natural, or am I going to add color? And if I add color, there's a few different ways you can do it. I mean, my gosh, you can use like Minwax stain, you can use shoe polish. I have these little bottles that are gourd paint that I buy that I can use and rub in. I also use alcohol ink a lot, and I will literally run it off the gourd. Once I do that, if I'm using alcohol ink, I use a varnish on the gourd that's UV. So I'll give it a few coats of UV varnish to help retain that color, and then I'll coat it with wax. But whether I'm using gourd paint or leaving the gourd natural like this, or doing the alcohol ink, I'll always give it a coat of wax and buff it off. When you are working with the gourd at this point, for me, the first step really is, if you're going to do color on the outside of the gourd, get your color on. I can go in and pick out pine needles, and I have a closet full of all different colors. I can pick out beads, I can pick out the color of thread that I want to use, but it all comes down to, what does that color look like when I put it on the gourd? You know, gourds for the most part are anywhere from kind of a beige to a deep copper color, And particularly if you're using alcohol inks, it's transparent, so a lot of that color is going to come through. So this one I decided to leave natural, and actually this was the top of a gourd that was a big gourd. So I decided to go earthy here. I wanted to use picture jasper. I've got some of these big beads and smaller ones. And use brown pine needles and kind of a butterscotch waxed linen.
Can you see the finished basket, or does it evolve as you make it?
The basket talks to you as you go along. I mean, I always have an idea in my head. Whatever I see in the beginning, it always ends up different. Sometimes it's a little different, sometimes it's a lot different. Stitching the coil on. When you do that, you're going to end up with this beautiful spiral pattern. To feed the coil, at this point, I'm going to pick up 3. And I'm going right in the center of this and feeding them up. You do not want to see this white end at all. If you don't get it in the center, if it pokes out like that, that's not any good. Or even if it pokes out and it's under this thread, but you can see the white, that's not good. You want the pointy end of the pine needle to your right. The blunt end goes in like that, and it's got to be buried.
You just gradually work around and,
Yeah.
and keep doing as many circuits as possible?
Yeah, but when you are adding beads, you are adding them as you weave along. They become part of your coil.
Okay.
Rarely would you go in and embellish afterwards. Does it happen occasionally? Yeah. This is woven right in. And to add a bead, you've got to get it in between the upper coil and the lower coil. And you don't want this coil to be at a tortuous angle. So I'm going to give it an extra loop and then come in here and pick up my bead. I take a normal stitch, in on the right, out on the left. You've got to go back up through it. If you don't, you're going to be looking at the thread on the back side of the bead. So you come around, go back up through it. This can get pretty tight sometimes. Bring your thread back up behind. You always pull from the back. Tighten that down really tight, and then you've got your bead in there.
And it's a combination of craftsmanship and artistry.
Every single one has been different.
This is my favorite piece.
Okay, this is where sand meets water. I was thinking of the beach when I wove it. This is palm inflorescence, which is common in Florida. It comes off of a palm tree. It wasn't until I finished it and it had sat there for a few days, I walked out into my greenhouse and saw this hunk of wood that was sitting on the counter. Chris, who helps me garden, found it at the base of a tree and brought it in and set it there. That I thought it was perfect. So.
And these are little shells?
They're shells.
You had to drill a hole in the middle of them?
It came pre-drilled.
Oh, okay.
Praise the Lord, because power tools are not my favorite thing.
And it's hard to drill through anything like that that's fragile. And what are these little?
They're little seed beads.
Okay. And they sort of go on the surface more than in between?
Correct. So these, you're going through the bead, catching the coil down below and coming back up through the bead,
right,
so you don't see the thread on the back. These are you just go through it once and they're sitting on the surface.
Gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. Tell me a little bit about this.
Well, this would be similar to the one that we were looking at out on the workbench.
Right.
A gourd mounted on a piece of driftwood, and I had this in my head. The rest of it kind of evolved. Again, you know, I brought it around the back here because this was kind of doing something flippy weird. So, and then always for me the interesting part is how do you finish?
Right.
And it just comes at the very end. You know, out of 300 baskets, I probably have 5 that I can think of that are my favorites. This is one of them, along with your favorite. This is maybe my all-time favorite, and I think, you know, in a way it's kind of plain, but it just kind of glows. It's the finish on the gourd itself. I love the undulating part. You know, going into this, could I tell you how this was going to look? No, I didn't. This is just one of them where you just start weaving.
And it just evolves into a finished piece.
I knew that I was going to use, these are coconut shells, and I knew I was going to use seed beads, and that's the only thing that I knew going into it.
Yeah, it has sort of a metallic finish to it that really brings out the gourd a lot. And I really like this, how this is tapered. These beads are tapered here.
And here I did the seed beads on the outside and on the inside.
And on the inside.
So depending upon how you're looking at it, you can see the seed beads.
Right. And some nice, I always like to see negative space in art. That's really interesting to see that there. I can see why it's one of your favorites.
This basket is typical of a basket talks to you, and you have to let it do its thing. I had never seen a basket before with 3 centers. I'm sure they're out there, but I wanted to weave one with 3 centers. And in my mind, I thought this sucker was going to be flat. Well, as I'm going around, it kept twisting on me. So I'm sitting here mashing it down on the table. By the 7th time around, it's still doing one of these twists. And I'm like, you know, my option is to glue it to the table forever,
right,
or let it do its thing. Yeah. So I let it do its thing, and oh my gosh, I love the way that it turned out. I put beads there because sitting on a table, if you're sitting in a chair, you can kind of look up and underneath it, and I wanted it to look finished. This is River Basin. So this gourd is one that I grew. It's the sister to the gourd that you saw earlier when we were out in the garage.
Yeah, the black one.
Yeah, and it cleaned up something terrible. I mean, it was just so ugly. And Chris was out helping me clean out the garage one day, and I said, why don't we just pitch that gourd? And he's like, I don't know, I kind of like it. So it sat there for a while, and I looked at it for a while, and the more I looked at it, I thought, if I'm going to leave it ugly looking, maybe I need to emphasize its ugliness. So I put gold leaf on it and went ahead and wove it. And frankly, when I was done, I liked it so much, the markings on it, that I think I could have left the gold leaf off of it. It's amazing what you can do with a really ugly gourd.
So this is actually the top of a gourd.
Yes.
Wow.
So I was going through my top of the gourd phase. As you can see, there's several in here. What was interesting about this one, I was at the Gourd gathering a couple of years ago in Waynesville, North Carolina, and I just saw this beautiful piece of wood, which I bought.
How'd you get this green patina to it?
You know, normally I will always spray paint the inside black.
Right.
This one, I just used a metallic gourd paint, which is what I used on the outside too.
Oh, okay. Out here as well.
Yeah, I did a little wood burning here.
All right. And this is a different color?
Yes. Again, gourd paint.
Okay.
Both of them are metallics.
Now that you've seen a basket artisan at work, I hope you have a greater appreciation for what it takes to make fine art. It takes passion, practice, and time. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time on Handmade.
Basketry is an adventure with what you find, the shape of the gourd, the color of the needles, the beads that you use.